Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Star Wars Visions Volume 2, Season 2, whatever way you want to call it. So yeah, this is a really cool thing to get. We obviously have known for a while that this has been coming. And Visions 1 was very good, very enjoyable. This is such a clever, creative thing that they are doing for Star Wars. So I think most people were very happy to see a second one get announced. So I'll do this in the same way I did the first video. I'll give some quick general thoughts overall on how I felt the season went. I'll go through each of them in sort of like episode order. And then I will give you my ranking of the 9 shorts at the end. So, overall, I think in terms of overall quality, this is very similar to the first batch. It should be noted, I suppose, right up front as well, that it's a bit more of an international group of animation studios this time out, whereas the season 1 still had a bit of variety, but it was a little bit more, anime studio focused, whereas here it's just animation studios focused. There is still some anime stuff here, but that is just something that's interesting to note. Compared to season 1, I think you perhaps don't have the kind of the same level of lowlights that you had, I think, from the first batch. You perhaps don't quite have the height of Ninth Jedi here in terms of the best ones here. But I think the overall quality of everything kind of has come together a little bit more. Like the middle of this list here, when we get to it, is kind of tricky here because they're all good in their own way. So it's kind of interesting to see that for the most part, I'd say there's 2 that I think really particularly stand out. You could maybe make a case for like 3. There's a little bit of a middle group, and then maybe a lower group, but it's not as like broad as the first one. So that's something that is interesting to note. So I think because we know what Visions is now, let's get just straight into discussing them. So the first short here is called Sith. So this was an interesting one for me, where it's like, this is a very cool animation style. I think they get to a very interesting reveal with the fact that, oh, this is a former Sith apprentice, and her master is like coming to bring her back into the fold, and she defeats him, but he's kind of thinking that like, you've killed me, so you are now the Sith master, but she doesn't want to do that. For me, if there's an issue with this one, it's that it felt like the backstory needed to be fleshed out a little bit more to fully make what's happening here hit home a little bit harder. Like, why is a former Sith apprentice now just like a painter? Like, I just felt like you needed to allude a little bit more to the backstory to make this hit a little bit harder. Otherwise, it just felt a little bit like, oh, okay, so we just want to have a fight. And they tried to touch on some light versus dark stuff in terms of like balance of the Force, but I don't really feel like any particular statement was made about it other than it's a mix. I have one light lightsaber, one, dark Sith lightsaber. That's why she had orange and red lightsaber on her double-bladed lightsaber. But again, it wasn't really saying anything, because at the end it's just like, oh yeah, I'm going back to my life, I get to choose what I want to do. Okay. Ultimately, the first half just felt like a lot of cool visuals, but they could have used that time to make the second half of the story that already works hit a little bit harder. So I think just on the writing department on this one, I think just fell a little bit short of what it could have been, because otherwise I think there is some huge potential with this story to actually really deliver something more notable. Because, look, this Master Apprentice stuff, especially with the Sith, and we always look for some of these kind of villain-focused stories, there's lots of potential here. I just felt there was a massive contrast between what the story was when they were fighting and like what the backstory for this character, like why she wasn't the Sith anymore, what exactly happened there, where it came from. But that's that. Moving on to the second short, which was Screecher's Reach, which interestingly is done by an Irish animation studio, which is a very, very well-known Irish animation studio. So that was really cool to see Star Wars done with an Irish animation. And especially going through the episode, you know, like they actually incorporated this a little bit into the actual like dialogue. So just hearing some of the accents and some of the wording on some of this stuff was kind of fun to see, because like of course I'm Irish as well. It's an interesting one, but it's also good because this is probably one of the standout shorts from the whole set here in season 2. This one starts off a little bit slow. You don't really know where it's going. They're just going on an adventure. They're leaving this place where they work. But then it gets like really, really dark. And you're like, okay, she's kind of been quote unquote guided here. Here is the kind of ghost of Screecher's Reach. And it turns out it's this kind of Banshee-esque Sith Lord character who our main character here ends up kind of just about managing to defeat, claiming her lightsaber and finishing the fight. And this is where it's one of the cooler twists in the entire season 2 happens, where you think like, oh, she's come through this kind of like crazy situation. She now has a lightsaber. She'll go on from here and become heroic, and we'll just play up that aspect of her. You know, she's going to be this adventurous character who has latent force potential. But then it all kind of connects together and you realize, no, she's been guided here. This was a like Sith test. Someone is considering her as a Sith apprentice, and she succeeded in a way, and the way that she did it, that she has been basically accepted as a Sith apprentice, and so leaves with the Sith Master who arrives in at the end. Very like ominous scene as the ship lands and she's just kind of ushered here. And because there was such a like a shift and a twist at the end, I'm kind of like, wait, are they gotta do some sort of thing where like she's gonna say like, kill your friends before you come with me? Or is this just meant to be the sort of quote unquote betrayal here of like, what did you do down there with the ghost, and you're not joining us on like you're not staying with us to get yourself out of this situation. You are going with her. That's the decision that you are actually making here. That was very interesting to me. So pretty high marks, I think, for Screecher's Reach, and I think the general reception I've seen so far has been that this is definitely one of the highlights. So very good there. The third short is called In the Stars. This one didn't quite work for me. It was, you know, the canonicity of Visions is obviously all over the place. Basically, I don't think you're really meant to consider anything canon. So this was just sort of what the Imperials were on this planet. They've wiped out most of the species. There's these two sisters. Their mother had just been killed like previously. They both have latent force potential. The younger sister wants to use it, but the older sister kind of holds back because she views it as being the thing that sort of like got them all killed. There is a element of kind of environmental kind of stuff with the Empire kind of like stealing the water. We need to get it back, and it's just you know, the older sister is overly protective. The younger sister comes in handy. They kind of win the day. The older sister uses her force powers. It's a very like functional story. It works. It just to me felt like I didn't fully connect with the like every element of the story. You know, the animation looks good, of course, but it was just a little basic for me, and there wasn't too much to kind of latch onto, like this sort of Imperial focus we've seen a lot. And it's interesting because one of the shorts coming up is also sort of quote unquote Imperial focus, and it was really good, so we'll get to that shortly. But yeah, In the Stars, not my favorite, but we'll get to the rankings later on. The fourth short is called I Am Your Mother. This is the Aardman animated one, the kind of Wallace and Gromit animation studio. And yes, this is the most sort of like kid focused one. This one definitely, you would say, has the most basic story. But what I would say about this one is that it had solid, fundamentals. It told its story, even if it was very basic, well. It, had the beginning, middle, end. It hit the little emotional beats, even if they were very simplistic. Well, yes, it's going to be always very difficult to get across the, kid is embarrassed by their mother, but they ultimately do respect their mother, and they've learned a lot from them as well. They hit that point, but it was nicely done. It was creative. You had the fun sort of Star Wars racing aspect that we've kind of seen before, but tonally, yes, it's not the most serious of these, but it was fun and creative, and it did what it had to do. And ultimately, I don't think we were expecting this particular animation studio to do anything super thought-provoking, so this was solid, even if it is ultimately still going to, I think, rank relatively low on the list. Then we get to short number 5, Journey to Dark Head. And this one was very interesting, especially for me as an Avatar fan, primarily on my channel. This is done by Studio Mir, or Mir. I don't actually know. I've never known exactly how to pronounce the studio's name. But either way, this is the Legend of Korra animation studio. They did Voltron, the Dota animation, and this has been a studio that's been in the spotlight for a while now, over the last couple of years. Definitely one of the more hyped ones. It's the longest, I think, of these. And I think this is our 9th Jedi of season 2. For me, this was my favorite, spoiling my list, but I think it just has to be, for me, the favorite. The animation style, of course, I love. It told a story. It had some ambition with the story it was trying to tell. It told like a little bit of a backstory, actually had kind of character arcs a little bit for the characters. And sure, it's a short, there's an element of like it's a little bit kind of like rushed. Does everything fully come together? No. But when you have a blend across the shorts here of sort of stories that only right at the end introduce an element, and they never really introduce backstory and when it actually needed it. To me, one of these shorts actually being like, I would love a follow-up to this, rather than you just being left completely confused by almost everything that happened, is still like a positive, and that's what I want. And fundamentally, like as a reviewer, that's what I'm looking for, is that you attempt to tell a story, which it did, that you attempt to have some ambition with the story to do something of note, which it definitely did. The art style was good, you had interesting characters, and it worked. Like the plot here was interesting because again it lent into some of the elements we saw maybe more in season 1, where you have a Jedi struggling to deal with kind of their master and a lot of people around them being killed by a Sith. This seemed to be kind of like Old Republic era, just based on the fact that it's like a war between Jedi and Sith, and it felt like there was implied to be a lot of Sith going on. So that was interesting. And then the actual stuff like on the planet of like the main female character, and the fact that like she was part of this like kind of culture that saw prophecies on the stones under the dark and light heads, was very, very interesting. And even though it's very short, there's not a ton of time to develop the characters, I thought that they managed to create a relatively nice dynamic between these two characters in a short space of time, to the point where when it ends and it seems like they're maybe going to team up on another mission, I kind of want to see where they go next. So like the Ninth Jedi was like, yeah, give me a sequel to this. This for sure was a give me a sequel to this. And it's sort of notable that in a way, like, both of those are ones done by like anime studios known for doing very good series. You would want to see that, and these are studios that would definitely be like capable of that, whereas some of these studios I think are more kind of like movie focused rather than series focused, where Star Wars, of course, as we've seen in the past few years, does work better as a series, shows, rather than movies in a lot of cases, even though of course it started as movies. So yeah, lots of praise from me for Journey to Dark Head. like I said, wasn't perfect just because it didn't have the time to completely explain everything, flesh everything out. But it was, to me, definitely among the best that we had here in season 2. Then we go to 6, which, like, going into this one, Spy Dancer, like seeing the little description on Disney Plus, I was kind of like, oh, I'm not sure about this one. But this was probably the most, like, I went in not really expecting much, but then came out actually pretty impressed. The art style, I think, is a very interesting one where, like, in there are elements of it that seem very sort of like standard animation style, but then there's just some flourishes of like a very unique style. And with the way they did the visuals of, like, you know, a lot of the characters here being these kind of like sky dancers, you know, spy dancers, whatever way you want to call it. um the verticality of a lot of the kind of action scenes that were happening here, but the kind of plotting and world building here of, like, this is like a rebel spy spying on stormtroopers at this you know, cabaret place that the Imperials come to. That was super clever. And then again, it attempts to be a little bit more ambitious. It has this backstory of, like, the main character, like her son was taken, and she's convinced that the guy who took her son is actually the person up in, like, the main kind of private box. But it ends up being revealed to be this younger kind of Imperial officer. And again, you kind of can see it coming a little bit, like, especially right towards the last couple of minutes, you see it coming. But it was still well done. The reveal that the officer is actually her son, who was taken 20 years ago and is now part of the Empire, and how do we handle this? And again, ending on the note of, like, we could absolutely do a sequel to this, and I would actually like to see what happens here. And some surprisingly dark moments where, were these meant to be Zabrak with the horns? I'm not quite sure. Or is this more of like the Eth Koth? No, wait, is Eth Koth a Zabrak? I completely forget. But either way, they had the horns there, and he, as an Imperial, who are more human focused, has them kind of like what, shaved or cut off. That was a surprisingly dark kind of moment to highlight that kind of like Imperial kind of like, they'll only accept humans, or if you're good enough, if you look like a human to a certain degree. So interesting stuff there. So yeah, this one actually quite impressed me with its storytelling for sure. Because for me, as a reviewer, even though I am aware that this is maybe more focused on the different animation stuff like that, I'm still going to give top marks to the ones that actually try and tell a really good story over the ones that just try and have a really unique style. At least that's my approach to reviewing this. The 7th short is The Bandits of Golak. This one was interesting because, like, the art style was actually, like, interesting because it's almost like the Bad Batch, like, kind of Clone Wars art style, with just a slight stylization change. But I assume it's like their own specific animation style. But it's interesting that it ends up looking somewhat similar to the kind of 3D animated style that we're used to on animated projects for Star Wars. So that was kind of unique here. But yeah, we get the story here of the, kind of a brother and sister here. The sister is force sensitive, and, you know, they're being pursued by the Empire. Of course, he's trying to be super protective, but she's kind of wants to more openly use her kind of powers. Where did we see this before? And you can see some of the similarities between some of the shorts. Again, we get to the reveal that there is a Jedi in the kind of place that they end up in. There's a kind of fight with an Inquisitor there. This is, I think, the Indian animation studio, and you can see, like, throughout the whole thing that it's very kind of like Star Wars, and then, like, seeing, like, the Inquisitor with kind of almost like the Indian inspired kind of like clothing and stuff like that was actually really unique to see over the course of the episode. So this is one where, like, it was a little slow to start, but it got there in the end, and I think delivered something that was pretty nice, even if I do feel quite a few of the other shorts overall were the better kind of better told stories. But again, this is one where, like, yeah, this is one where you'd maybe want to see like a time skip go ahead of just like what is the result of this Jedi in hiding, and she seems to imply that she's training a lot of other Force sensitive people. So interesting stuff. Then we go to number 8, which is The Pit, which again I was pretty impressed with this one. I think they managed to get some really nice storytelling out of this one, while also having a style that I actually did really like. Yes, this one feels a little bit like it could almost take place almost anywhere in the Star Wars universe, because literally it is just a pit in the ground and there's a town, like city, kind of fairly close to the pit. But the plot kicks off basically when they're digging for kyber crystals. The Empire's in control. They exhaust this pit where they find the kyber crystals, and instead of, and they free everyone, but they leave them in the pit. They don't get them out and let them be free that way. They leave them down there and just head off. And it's this kind of like shocking, surprising thing of just like, what do they do? Like, they've obviously been digging this down and they've developed this, town that constantly is digging downwards. So like they know how to survive down here, but it is not like true freedom in that way. And so the question is, they need to get out. And you think initially the kind of the teenage guy is going to be your main character, and for the first half he is. He climbs up, the help of the animals, he climbs up the side of the pit and gets out, goes to the town, and he's not fully listened to, but like he seems to get a decent attention of people, where like they remember later on in the episode when everything kind of kicks off that he was there speaking about things and making them question a few little bits and pieces. But he eventually gets caught by the stormtroopers in the town. And in to me, one of the most kind of brutal things, and probably like outside of like plot twists, the most kind of shocking thing that we saw across all these episodes, he is just tossed back into the pit. And because of how deep the pit is, and they focused so much on his climb up and how dangerous it was, you know for sure that the second he is thrown over the side into this into the pit, he's dead. And it's so far down, like they get across the idea of like to his sister, his little sister, like, you don't want to see this. And they just cover his body because it's like brutal, obviously, what happens because of how far he fell. But it sort of inspires them. And, there was talk earlier on in the episode about sort of like the light inside, and their chant gradually brings the people from the city out, and they kind of burst through the stormtroopers, and they do rescue everyone. And it's a little bit more of a kind of positive ending of hope, and ending with the sort of like graffiti that was kind of teased earlier on, being our initial main character there, but also his sister there as sort of like the new hope for the people. And again, just a little tease of like at the end, like ending on the note of like she has the sort of like neutral kyber crystal, but she's force sensitive, and it turns blue as she kind of makes it stand up. So a nice little one where, again, I'd be okay with a sequel for this one, absolutely. So I did really like The Pit. And then we ended with Ao's song. This one had a very unique art style in that it was kind of like it was like some of those Nintendo games like the Kirby or Yoshi, where they go for more of the kind of fabric-y style, and that's what they went for here. Again, similar to The Pit, like a kyber crystal focus of sorts here. In this case, I suppose corrupted crystals, and she has sort of like the force power with her voice to quell the crystals, and there's a bit of an incident here. There's a mysterious character around, but in the end, the big kind of climactic scene happens. She manages to sing kind of full voice and kind of purifies the crystals, and proof that she is sort of force sensitive, because the mysterious character is revealed to be a Jedi, and the decision is made at the end that she will train. So, nice, solid. Because it was the last one, I do feel this one fell a little bit short when I think we had like almost all the elements of this one all felt like they were done better in other stories. That's kind of my general view on this one, is just that like when we got there in the end, the kyber crystal stuff I think from the previous short was better. The whole master kind of apprentice secret Jedi stuff I think was kind of done better in like the seventh one as well, right at the end. It was very creative, and again, one of the ones that's maybe a little bit more sort of like kid focused, but still good. And that's the thing I want to get across overall with this, is that I don't think any of them are like bad or particularly awful this time. Whereas I think in the first one there was the Astro Boy themed one where I felt it was just a little bit too on the nose, just directly trying to do that. The what was it, Tatooine Rhapsody was maybe a little bit too weird. Whereas it seems like in this one, even if you're making the case that the Aardman animated one is a bit weird, it's still more in line with the rest of them than maybe some of the other ones were last time out. So let's get into my rankings here of them. So in reverse order, even though I'm doing my best to sort of like defend it here, I probably still would put the, what's it called? I Am Your Mother, which is the Aardman animated one, at the bottom. Just because I think it's solidly told for what it is, but it is still pretty basic. But I do appreciate what it is trying to do. And like I said, I will typically always give praise to the storytelling that attempts to be a little bit more ambitious. And I do think all of the other stories tried to do a bit more than this one did. At number 8 on my list, I'm going to give it to... No, I want to make it clear. 8 and 7, I think, are pretty close together, basically interchangeable. But roughly, I'm going to say number 3, which is In the Stars with the Two Sisters, the third episode. This was just, I think, unfortunately, of these groupings, just one of the ones I didn't fully connect with, I think, what they wanted me to take out of this episode. It is not bad. I understand what they're trying to do. It just didn't grab me, unfortunately. And that's just kind of the basic thoughts on this one, is just like, other ones really, really grabbed me. This one didn't quite. Very close. Could be interchanged. I'm going to give to the last one here, Ao's Song. And I'll praise this one just a little bit more for, I think the art style is very, very unique. I did like the Kyber Crystal focus, even if it was done better in a previous episode. And I like the kind of positive ending of like this character. You'd maybe like to see where she goes after this. But yeah, those three probably to me are like I would say like that is the three kind of slightly weaker end of things ones for me. Everything else above this is very good. And then, like I've said before, I think there's probably a group of probably top 2 or 3 that is really, 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 really good. Number 6 on my list, I'm going to give it to the 7th one, The Bandits of Golak, which, again, for one of the longer ones, I maybe just expected there to be a little bit more depth to the plot overall. Kind of like the first episode, like it got there in the end and had some really good stuff introduced right towards the end. The build-up, I think, was probably a little slow right at the start. And if this had gotten into the sort of like meat of what we're trying to do a little earlier, I think this one could have gone to a few more places that would have made it a little bit more interesting. But it's still in the category of like, the higher quality stuff from the batch of episodes. At number 5, I'm going to give it to the first one, which is Sith. I really appreciate where they got to in the end again. Very similar to episode 7. But I of course like the Sith apprentice dynamic. I wish more Star Wars would cover this, which is why I'm very excited for The Acolyte, and why I've always been advocating for, I think they should probably tell the Darth Plagueis story at some point in a movie or a show. So I like that. I was still remain a little bit confused by why they chose to focus like the first half of the short like almost completely on just these kind of like paint visuals and stuff like that, as opposed to adding onto the story so you could understand what was going on a bit better. But the second half, once the action gets going and the kind of reveals start to happen, is pretty solid. It's just unfortunate that when it ends, it's almost like I almost don't know if there's enough substance there to do a sequel because they haven't covered it yet. That's the only, I think, weakness with that one. Number 4, I will give it to the 8th short, The Pit, which I think, again, sort of surprised me. It in terms of the scope of its story, it's maybe a little bit basic because it's just a hole in the ground and then a city like right next to it. But they hit some, I think, nice storytelling beats, had some triumphant moments, some shocking moments, and even though there's some tragedy in this one, it kind of ends on a pretty like positive note overall. And the ending with the girl like and changing the kyber crystal, I thought was a very nice kind of moment as well. I think they used that in the trailers. Then we go to my top three, which I probably say at this point, like this is where I think with the top three, I would definitely say that this is where the storytelling gets to the point where it's all like really good, top tier. This is the stuff you could truly, I think, make into a series. And I think this speaks to like the slightly higher quality that like this top tier isn't like 1 or 2 like in the first season. There's 3, and you could almost include the Pit in this, I think, with the potential that it had as well. But number 3 I'm going to give to the 6th short, The Spy Dancer. Again, I just like, compared to what I went in expecting versus what I got out of it at the end, I was actually really impressed with the storytelling. The story of this mother and her son at the end, and then even the other kind of character who kind of like saves her throughout this, the other dancer, was really pretty good. And like the visuals of them swinging around, going up and down, the action set pieces were very, very good. And again, the twist, even though it was maybe choreographed a little bit before maybe they wanted it to within the story, still delivered really, really well. So I was pleasantly surprised with The Spy Dancer. My second favorite one is going to be Screecher's Reach, which again has the nice twist in the story that gets surprisingly dark. Again, there's the Sith apprentice aspect, which is kind of fascinating, and you wonder like, what era are we in here? Is this a Rule of Two style thing, or are we still in sort of maybe more Old Republic-y style thing here? Either way, compared to, again, almost like what you'd expect potentially from like the style and like, you know, where they were talking about beforehand with the kind of dynamic between the characters, and then they get to the incident and the fight with the kind of ghost, and it goes places you don't really expect it to. So I was pretty impressed with Screecher's Reach. And then number 1 is the 5th short, Journey to Darkhead, which, like I said throughout this, to me was just the solid across the board, nailing an art style that I really, really like. Good storytelling, characters I could latch on to, tried to be a little bit ambitious with the story, and I think most likely to like please let Studio Mir do a Star Wars anime, please. That would look incredible. That's the big thing I have coming out of this, is like, give me a show with that studio. Same way I felt with The Ninth Jedi, like do a show using that studio. Maybe it's tricky to organize for them outside of just this short, but Studio Mir has been doing work with various different kind of like brands and licenses and stuff like that. So I'd like to see it happen, but I'm also kind of like, actually, Star Wars, stay away from Studio Mir. I'd like for them to get to do some Avatar Studios stuff as well. So don't take up all their time. And that's my thoughts on Star Wars Visions Season 2. My assumption probably would be that I think they will do one of these every so often. Probably the rough same cadence that they did for this one. I do wish, I think, especially as we go forward, that they would lean a little bit more into trying to make them actually feel canon and important, rather than just letting kind of the creatives go wild and do whatever they want with Star Wars. Because to me, Star Wars is a broad enough universe to where if you let them set their story where they want in the timeline, even if they have to adhere to the continuity of that era, these creators should be able to deliver something impressive in that timeline. There shouldn't be that many limitations that this whole project falls apart. I feel like, in a way, the only thing, in a way, as a big kind of core maybe complaint with Visions is just that in nearly every short, you're like, in the back of your head as a Star Wars fan, you're thinking, where is this set? What era is this in? Is this important to anything else? And unfortunately, the answer with most things is probably like, I don't think it is really related to anything else. I don't think it's meant to be canon as such. There are certainly ones where it's clear that there is some attempt to fit them into a specific era, but I think everything points to the fact that they don't really seem to particularly care about canon with this. But I think it would make them feel a little bit more important if they could do something with that. And by that, I don't mean that these should be featuring like all the main characters and stuff like that. By all means, introduce your own characters, but like, do some of the stuff presented here and make it feel important. Like something like, say, the pit. Like, what if you actually turn the girl at the end with the Kyber crystal and turn her into a notable character? She just happened to be introduced in Star Wars Visions, but like, you go on and you actually maybe do an anime series featuring this character and she becomes a beloved character. And it becomes this kind of like what happened with like Ahsoka, but with this character from Visions instead. I'd like for it to be able to do that, but with the limitations that we currently have, it doesn't really feel like that is perhaps possible. And so it sort of limits where they are, where it's very much just like, I'm watching Star Wars Visions, let me turn on my, Visions analysis thing and turn off most of my I'm a Star Wars fan stuff, because there are things I'm meant to think of here, and there are things I'm not meant to think of when I'm reviewing this, and that's an interesting point. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Star Wars Visions Season 2. What were your favorites? What did you feel were the weaker ones? And what do you think of my order and my list? I think there's going to be a little bit of variation across this one, because I think they are a bit closer together. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.